It's Friday night. Your phone lights up with invitations. A birthday gathering, drinks after work, a concert your friend has been talking about for weeks. And instead of that familiar flutter of excitement, you feel something else. A quiet resistance. Not anxiety exactly, not even dread, just a preference. A pull toward your own space that feels more honest than anything you could manufacture for the outside world. So you say no. You stay home. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice asks if something's wrong with you. Here's what's interesting. We've built an entire cultural narrative around the idea that wanting to be alone is a symptom of something. That healthy, well-adjusted people are the ones who can't wait to be around others. That home is where you retreat when you're damaged, but the world is where you go when you're whole. But what if we've had it backwards this time? The stereotype is clear enough. People who love staying home are antisocial. They're avoiding life. They're missing out on experiences, connections, the richness of human interaction. They're probably depressed, or at least heading that way. They need to get out more, push themselves, say yes to things, because that's what living fully looks like, right? Except when you look at the actual research on solitude and social preferences, a different picture emerges. It turns out that people who genuinely prefer spending time alone aren't running from connection. They're running towards something else, something we don't have a convenient cultural script for. In the early 2000s, researchers started distinguishing between different types of solitude. There's the kind that comes from loneliness, from feeling unwanted or excluded. That type correlates with all the negative outcomes you'd expect. But then there's voluntary solitude, the kind chosen freely, sought out deliberately. And that type? It correlates with increased creativity, stronger sense of identity, and what psychologists call self-determination, the ability to act from your own values rather than external pressure. This matters because it suggests that the person who loves staying home isn't necessarily avoiding relationships. They're prioritizing a different kind of relationship, the one they have with themselves. And in a culture that treats self-focus as selfishness, that distinction gets lost. Think about what happens in your brain when you spend time alone versus time in social settings. Social interaction, even positive social interaction, requires a specific kind of cognitive load. You're reading faces, modulating your responses, managing impressions, tracking conversational threads. For some people, this feels energizing. For others, it's like running software in the background that drains the battery faster than you realize. The psychologist Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades studying optimal human experience, found that people often report their most creative and fulfilling moments happening in solitude, not because other people are obstacles, but because certain types of deep focus require a quiet mind, and a quiet mind often requires a quiet room. There's a reason writers, scientists, artists across centuries have guarded their solitude fiercely. Thoreau didn't go to Walden Pond because he hated people. He went because he understood something about the quality of thinking that happens when you're not performing for an audience, even an audience of one. Darwin took long, solitary walks. Einstein talked about his thought experiments conducted in complete isolation. They weren't broken. They were optimizing for a different kind of awareness. But here's where it gets complicated, because there is a difference between choosing solitude and hiding in it, between loving your own company and being afraid of everyone else's. So let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, just to yourself. When you choose to stay home, what are you moving toward? Is it the book you've been wanting to read, the project you've been excited about, the simple pleasure of your own thoughts? Or is it away from something, away from judgment, rejection, the exhausting work of pretending you're someone you're not? Both can feel like the same choice from the outside, but internally they're completely different experiences. One is nourishing, the other is depleting while pretending to be rest. The people who truly love staying home often describe a sense of fullness in their solitude, not emptiness.
They're not killing time until something better comes along. They're inhabiting time in a way that feels intentional. They might be learning something, creating something, simply experiencing the rare luxury of their own attention directed exactly where they want it. The people who are avoiding life, they describe something else, a numbness, a sense of the hours passing without quite touching them. The distinction isn't in the behavior itself, it's in the quality of presence. Psychologists talk about something called self-complexity, the idea that psychologically healthy people have multiple well-developed aspects of identity: work self, friend self, partner self, solitary self. The problem isn't spending time in one domain, it's when one domain becomes the only domain, when you can no longer access the others with significant distress. So if you love staying home but can also show up for people you care about when it matters, you're probably fine. If you love staying home because leaving feels impossible, that's different information. In Japan, there's a concept called hikikomori, which describes severe social withdrawal among young adults. But there's also ohitorisama, the practice of doing things alone by choice, going to restaurants alone, traveling alone, not as a consolation prize, but as a preference. The culture makes room for both. One is pathology, the other is simply a different way of being in the world. We don't make that distinction as clearly in the West. We tend to pathologize solitude by default, then wonder why people who need it feel defensive about their choices. The irony is that some of the deepest connections happen between people who know how to be alone, because they're not using relationships to escape themselves. They're bringing a self to the relationship that's been attended to, developed, understood. They know what they think because they've given themselves the space to figure it out. There's a quiet intelligence in understanding your own needs, even when they don't match the cultural template. Even when friends don't understand why you'd rather stay in than go out. Even when you're made to feel like you're missing something essential by not wanting what everyone else seems to want. Because here's the thing about modern life. We're overstimulated in ways previous generations couldn't have imagined. Constant noise, constant input, constant demands for our attention and reaction. The person who loves staying home might not be retreating from reality. They might be the only one who's noticed how loud reality has become. In that context, choosing solitude isn't weakness, it's resistance, a refusal to let the external world dictate the terms of your internal experience, a quiet insistence that your attention, your energy, your presence belongs to you first. This doesn't mean isolation is always healthy. It doesn't mean relationships don't matter. But it does mean that the knee-jerk assumption that more social contact equals better mental health isn't quite right. For some people, the right amount of social contact is less than average. And average, as always, is just average, not optimal, not prescribed, just what most people happen to do. So maybe the question isn't whether you love staying home too much. Maybe it's whether you're doing it consciously. Whether you're creating a life that actually fits you or just defaulting to what feels safest. There's a version of staying home that's about self-care and a version that's about self-abandonment. Only you know which one you're living. But if you're someone who genuinely comes alive in your own space, who thinks more clearly, feels more yourself, creates more authentically when you're alone, that's not a flaw in your design. That's information about how you're built. And building a life around that information isn't selfish, it's sane. The truth is simpler than we make it. Some people recharge in crowds, some people recharge in quiet. Neither is better, neither is broken. Both are just different operating systems trying to run the same program called being human. And maybe the real courage isn't forcing yourself to be more social. Maybe it's having the honesty to live according to your actual nature instead of your imagined one. If this resonated, the next videos explore how we confuse personality with pathology and why self-awareness might matter more than self-improvement. Not because you need fixing, but because understanding yourself clearly changes everything.